The first layer of the integumentary system is the epidermis, and there are 5 epidermal strata from deep to superficial. And this is only in thick skin, though. In thin skin, there is no stratum lucidum. So, a way that I like to encourage students to remember this is the mnemonic come, let's get sun burnt. So not only is it something you should not do, but it will make it memorable, hopefully to remember it. But that's only in thick skin. So the let's is for the lucidum. If it's thin skin, of course, it would just become get sun burnt. And we wouldn't have let's for the stratum lucidum. So it's important that you remember these. It's perhaps easy if you use the mnemonic, you'll remember them from deep to superficial, or I'm sorry, from superficial to deep. This slide is showing them from deep to superficial. So you, of course, just reverse this and go from stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, stratum basal. So if I were to ask you something like a surgeon where it was cutting into skin, they would cut first through the corneum, then the lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, or basale. But thick skin is only in 2 places in the body. It's found in the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. When we look at the epidermal strata, this would be an example of thick skin because you can see the stratum lucidum. So that will be the main differentiation. And the stratum lucidum is named because it's kind of a transparent layer. So the most superficial layer is the stratum corneum, which is going to be dead keratinocytes. So you're always sloughing off dead keratinocytes, but usually we don't notice them. But if you were to take a magnifying glass and look underneath your mattress, you would find some dead keratinocytes. So in this particular micrograph on the left-hand side of your slide, you could see all 5 strata, beginning with the stratum corneum, the stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basale. Between the stratum basale and the dermis, there is this very noticeable line which shows the separation between them. And there's distinct differences about what the strata look like. For example, the stratum granulosum has this grainy appearance that you can kind of see here. The stratum spinosum has a spiky appearance here because of the nuclei, and the stratum basale is only going to be one layer of epithelial cells, and it is mitotically active. So it's always dividing and always producing young epithelial cells that will replace the more superficial ones that are being sloughed off. Notice in the depths of the epidermis, we have a tactile cell in the stratum basale. We have those epidermal dendritic cells that I spoke of earlier. We have melanocytes in the stratum basale, living keratinocytes, and it's towards the superficial region of the epidermis that they start to die. Also extending out of the dermis is a sweat gland duct. And the dermis, as you can see here, is going to be the most superficial region of the dermis, which is the papillary region of the dermis. So there certainly are variations in the epidermis. So thin skin lacks the stratum lucidum, has only 4 layers in the epidermis, so it covers most of the body. This is going to be the stratum corneum. This would be the granulosum, and then this would be the spinosum and the basale. Down here would be the stratum basale shown on this image on the left-hand side of your screen. So it's important to remember that thin skin lacks the stratum lucidum and has 4 layers. So that would be everywhere on the body except for the palms and the soles. So thick skin contains 5 layers of epidermis, includes the stratum lucidum, and it is the image that is on the left-hand side of your slide. So we can see the corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and the basale. It has no hair follicles or sebaceous glands. Remember, the sebaceous glands are the oil glands, not the sweat glands. There certainly are sweat glands on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Thin skin lacks the stratum lucidum and only has 4 layers in the epidermis. And we can see that on the right side of your slide. There are different skin colors, as we know, in skin. And the reason for that would be due to things like hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein found in red blood cells. If we suddenly blush, that's because blood has rushed to the superficial capillaries and the dermal papillae. The dermal blood vessels have dilated and blood has moved towards the surface, so the person would appear red in color. However, the opposite is also true. When there's a lack of hemoglobin, the person has what's called cyanosis. It almost looks like they look white as a ghost. You've heard that term before. So blood will move to deeper levels, deeper layers of the dermis. The next pigment is due to melanin, and melanin is the pigment produced by melanocytes, which are in the stratum basale. And the purpose of melanin is to sort of block the nucleus where the DNA is. It's influenced by heredity and also exposure to ultraviolet light. So we do have some built-in protection from the UV light, but that doesn't mean that we should not wear sunscreen. So there's increases with exposure to ultraviolet radiation. And what's really interesting is that all people have the same number of melanocytes. The next pigment is carotene, and carotene is the yellow-orange pigment from foods such as carrots, and it has the ability to build up in the skin. There's actually an old episode of Scrubs, if you ever watched that show, where they have a patient that comes in, they call him the Carrot Man, I think. And he eats a lot of carrots and it builds up, and it's noticeable in the thick skin because of the stratum lucidum. Jaundice can be an accumulation of bilirubin from liver failure, and it would be a yellow appearance. Oftentimes it's seen in places like the whites of the eyes, which are called the sclera. So the next layer of the skin is the dermis, which is deep to the epidermis. It's composed of 2 different layers. Remember, that would be the areolar connective tissue and also the dense irregular connective tissue. So it was important for you to know that the papillary layer is the most superficial region. It accounts for about 20% of the thickness of the dermis, and it also accounts for those dermal papillae, those ridges on the most superficial region of the dermis. It's adjacent to the epidermis, and it has areolar connective tissue. Deep to the papillary region would be the reticular layer, which is about 80% of the thickness, and it's tough because it has dense, irregular connective tissue.